Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome you once again to the airwaves of Salamia this evening. It is Wednesday night with myself, United Wadi, as we welcome our listeners, our viewers on the various platforms of Salam Media. Wonderful that you are able to join us and once again unpacking critical issues, burning issues that impact on us as a society, that impact on the world. And the burning issue that is impacting on everybody in South Africa is Eskom. Now, this comes against the background of the latest developments that have been playing out, and that has been the resignation of Andre de Ruyter. And these were after some very, very damning revelations that were made. And the key question is who takes the blame? Where does the buck stop? And we know that the failure of South Africa's power utility is very much the failure of the ruling party of the government, and also at the same time looking at this crumbling parastatal and the state-owned enterprise called Eskom. Where are we actually heading for? And at some point in time, something is going to give, the bubble is going to burst. And this is a question that we are asking tonight. Who should be held liable for the failure to provide electricity to South Africa? Now, we've got a panel that has assembled this evening. We've got the leader of the United Democratic Movement, Bantu Holomisa. We've also got Crown Prince Adil Nchabelng, who is an energy expert. And we've got Phakamile Hlubi Majola, National Union of Metal Workers spokesperson. Looking up at my screen this evening, I see the Honorable Bantu Holomisa is up on the screen. Good evening to you, sir, and welcome to the show.
Good evening, and good evening to our viewers.
Good evening, and good evening to everyone.
Phakamile, thank you very much for your time as well. And I'm just waiting for my engineer to tell me when Adil is going to be online. But we can still continue. And starting with you, Mr. Holomisa, it is clear that the failure of Eskom, and the point I had made, is very much the failure of the ruling party. And we've seen even Andre de Ruyter leaving somewhat of a firestorm, for want of a better term, as far as the crumbling Eskom is concerned, and also leaving with an attack on the ruling party.
Well, the ruling party is accountable to the mess we are witnessing at Eskom. For the president to react on our papers by running away from being accountable, and his government, and accused for that, he says the local government municipalities are responsible for this. We feel that he has been wrongly advised, and that he seems not to care about the plight of the South Africans. But we'll discuss that later. But for now, we went to court, and precisely because we noticed that the government of the day doesn't care. This issue of load shedding has been around here now for almost 14 years. All the CEOs have come and contributed, and anytime when there's a problem, they always chase away these CEOs. Yet, we know now that Eskom has been a cash cow for the ruling party. A good example is to see the Hitachi and Chancellor House relationship, where the ANC got money from that transaction because Chancellor House is their investment. So Ruyter is on course. What he has said has been read before, heard before. He has just confirmed our suspicions. In fact, the United States, if you remember in the Hitachi saga, they penalized Hitachi, accusing them of peddling or involving corruption, with Chancellor House being a recipient of some millions, if not billions. So the outgoing or the CEO who has just left ESCOM was just confirming that indeed they received, the ANC received money. Funny enough, the ANC did not confirm up to this stage. We have been talking about this for years, this relation between Chancellor House and ESCOM, and saying to the voters of this country that the playing field has never been leveled. Why ANC would have access to state, to SOE's monies, as well as to state departments through BOSASA, for instance. But I'll leave that for you for now.
Well, thank you for that, and we just would like to bring in Phakamile into the discussion. Now, it is clear from what Mr. Holomisa is saying that the South African ruling party blames everyone but itself for the power crisis. And we've seen even the reaction of some of the ministers to the Reuters allegations that were made. When ministers are now saying that, criminals, lawsuits are causing the blackout. And again, all of this is testing the patience of the general public.
Good evening, and good evening to your viewers. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can.
Great. So I first of all, as Nomsa, we appreciate that you've given us this platform. Thank you so much. I do think that on the issue of ESCOM, it is quite bizarre that the president would say what he said in the court papers, where he basically tries to, sort of exonerate himself as the leader of government from this crisis. ESCOM is a state-owned entity, wholly owned by the state. So at the end of the day, the buck stops with this government in terms of load shedding and any related problems to do with ESCOM. But also, I want to just touch on something that you said earlier, if I may, where you were speaking about Andre de Ruyter. Our position as NUMSA is that Andre de Ruyter also has to be held accountable. It's very interesting that Andre de Ruyter went on TV and made a slew of allegations about corruption. He spoke about an amount of 1 billion rand that was being siphoned off from ESCOM a month. And he simply said that in an interview. He then also claimed that there was a cabinet minister who was directly involved in the corruption at ESCOM. Our question to Andre de Ruyter as NUMSA, as a recognized trade union at ESCOM that engages him regularly in the consultation forums on all issues at ESCOM, is we're quite surprised to hear him make these revelations, given that for the last 3 years he's been signing off on ESCOM's financials. Where is this billion rand looting reflected in ESCOM's financials? And if he's been signing off on the financials, he's partly responsible for what is in those documents. So he has a legal and fiduciary duty to, from the moment that he was aware that 1 billion rand was being siphoned away from ESCOM, he had a duty to approach law enforcement authorities, the Auditor General, Parliament. There's many structures that he had a duty to inform and to also lay criminal charges with respect to his allegations. So as far as we're concerned, until he actually produces that evidence, we remain skeptical. And part of the reason why we remain skeptical is because not last year, but the year before last, when NUMSA was involved in wage talks at ESCOM, we raised very sharply the fact that ESCOM was offering workers 0%, and yet for 10 years plus or more, the costs of primary energy have been escalating out of control. They've been going up by more than 10% every single year on year. There's been no intervention in those costs. As NUMSA, we believe that a lot of the reason why these costs have gone up is because there's corruption involved. There's contracts, there's IPP contracts as well as coal contracts, where members of the ANC elite are benefiting through these exorbitant contracts. We raised this sharply. We were ignored by de Ruyter. So there was clear evidence that we produced, that we raised around corruption and these corrupt contracts. And in fact, in 2019, cabinet even issued a resolution that these contracts must be reduced, cancelled, or renegotiated. De Ruyter did not implement those, and he did not support our claims. And yet here he claims as he leaves that suddenly there's R1 billion that gets siphoned off from Eskom every month. So we are highly skeptical in the face of the fact that there's no evidence thus far, anyway, to back up his claims, and also given his behavior, where he refused to assist us as Labour when we raised these issues. He refused to intervene on these exorbitant contracts, and now we are expected to believe him when he claims makes these claims of corruption. He has a responsibility in terms of his position to account, and without the evidence, it does seem to us that these allegations are a distraction from his failures as a GCEO, who, by the way, has actually failed to provide us with electricity. I'm sitting in this interview with yourselves in the dark because of rolling blackouts that Andre de Ruyter, as the GCO, failed to intervene on.
Well, thank you for that, Phakamile. And I see Crown Prince Adil Nchabelng has joined us as well. Adil, assalamu alaikum and welcome to the show. Adil, can you hear me? I think there is a slight problem connecting with Adil Nchabelng. But just to continue with General Bantu, I see here, there we go. Crown Prince Adil Nchabelng, assalamu alaikum and welcome. No. Well, we are having a problem, but just to continue with General Bantu Holomisa and against what Phakamile has been saying as well, that looking at the appointment of Andre de Ruyter, this was a government appointment. They knew who they were appointing at that point in time, and at that, also there was huge skepticism at that point in time as to the true reason and the real reason why the ANC had appointed, or the ANC government had appointed Andre de Ruyter. Very much involved was the Minister Pravin Gordhan, who was at the forefront of this appointment. And now we see that the ANC hitting back at de Ruyter. They also threatening to take legal action against the former CEO of Eskom, and at the same time putting him under pressure to come up with evidence of these corruption claims.
The ANC is not going to charge a writer. They are just deceiving the public. But what we need to do is that the points raised by the spokesperson for NUMSA is that, one, Ruyter reported to the minister, his minister, Pravin Gordhan, about the corruption which is taking place at Eskom. Minister Gordhan has confirmed that. What we should be expecting now is that Parliament, either through SCOPA or a special committee, I would prefer the latter, that is a special committee, to be appointed to probe this serious allegation. In that way, the Parliament can also come up with terms of reference, which would cover a lot of areas, including those which have been mentioned by Hlubi in her opening remarks. So I don't think there's any other way, because you know the police. If you go to the police now, they are not going to investigate. I mean, look at the people who were cited at Zondo Commission. The NPA head and the police hawks, I don't have any confidence in that lot. So let us ask Parliament to investigate, call Pravin to come forward, the former CEO to come forward, and ask them, when you say 1 billion rand is spent a day, what do you mean? Bring us the proof. When you say the ruling party is corrupt, but on that one, he has already referred us to what we know, the Chancellor House and the touch. So there's no shortcut. He is not going to waste his time. I would advise him, in fact, not even to go to those police and hawks, because you know it. Nothing will happen. But if Parliament takes this matter up and possibly come up with findings which would force the government to take action. This is what the ANC is doing. They're trying to deceive the public. No, we're going to charge him and this and that, and so on and so on. They are wasting our time. Parliament must wake up.
Thank you for that. And I see Adil Nchabelng, Press Funding, joined us. And just to bring Adil into the discussion, Adil, assalamu alaikum and welcome to you. Adil, if you could just unmute your mic. Adil? Well, certainly there are some problems as far as Adil is concerned, but Phakamile, just to come back to you, and I think the key issue here is when one looks at the ANC, when one looks at the government, when one looks at the president, and shying away from taking responsibility, irrespective of what has happened with Andre de Ruyter. And we've had many CEOs in the past, and they've come, they've gone, and apart from just the issues that Andre de Ruyter had raised, there are still many other issues that are playing out, and the government is not taking responsibility. The government is not taking accountability.
Oh, absolutely. Pardon me. The government has definitely been on autopilot on many issues, especially on the issue of Eskom, the issue of load shedding. First and foremost, we can describe as dereliction of duty the disastrous decision to choose Andre de Ruyter as a GCEO in the first place. This was a person who had zero understanding of a power utility like Eskom. As you know, he comes from a legal background. He's a lawyer by training. He was a CEO of Nampak. Nampak, he left it in a terrible state by the time he left. So really, one has to wonder what was going through the minds of the Minister of Public Enterprises as well as the board of Eskom at that time when they chose this person, who had absolutely nothing in their track record that could demonstrate that they actually had an understanding of what this job was. Why would they pick such a person to run a complicated entity like Eskom? Our view as NUMSA is that the choice in Andre de Ruyter was deliberate because it really helped the ANC in terms of what they've been doing, which has been to collapse our state-owned entities in order to justify the involvement of the private sector. In 2018, January 2018, when Cyril Ramaphosa was at Davos, at that time, we actually had excess energy. That's how good we were. We dealt with load shedding. We were sitting with excess energy. And at that time, the debate was raging about whether we should get nuclear power or not. And if you recall, that whole debate was very controversial because, people felt that because the issue of nuclear was coming through the former president, Jacob Zuma, that it would be a corrupt decision, and the idea was abandoned. And when he was addressing Davos, the World Economic Forum, those are the reasons that President Ramaphosa gave at that time for why we were not pursuing nuclear. And yet here we are, a couple of years later, and we're at stage 6. Some might even say stage 8 load shedding, if you look at the number of megawatts that we are shedding at the moment. And it just shows you that this Eskom that was at some point had excess energy is now at a point where we can't even keep the lights on for a 24-hour cycle. And we are here because the ANC does not want our SOEs to operate optimally. If Eskom was operating optimally, there would be no need for the private sector to get involved. But an Eskom that is collapsing creates a perfect justification for the involvement of the private sector, which has already started through the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Program. And one of the beneficiaries of that program is Patrice Motsepe, who's related to President Ramaphosa through marriage, who in the last bid window, when they were allocating bids for REIPPs, he got the lion's share. His company got the lion's share of those bids. There is this is not a coincidence. There is a direct relationship between what is happening to us in South Africa, where we are suffering as a result of load shedding, and how these SOEs are then used and repurposed for the benefit of people who have close ties to the ANC government. Look at SAA if you don't believe me. SAA right now is in the process of being privatized to a company called Takatso. We are told that SAA has been sold for 51 Rand. And one of the people who are involved in that deal is none other than Jabu Moleketi, who himself used to be a very senior, high-ranking member of the ANC. So really, it's very clear that what is happening right now is that the ANC leadership is ensuring that they and their family members or friends of them, of the organization, are able to loot through contracts, through the private sector at these state-owned entities whilst we suffer. If we are to deal with load shedding and we are to resolve this crisis today, Eskom itself in its own reports has said that you need to fix the Eskom coal fleet. There must be proper maintenance done. Now, unfortunately, Andre de Ruyter didn't have a clue of what proper maintenance looked like, which is why, again, we are here today. So what we need in the shortest time period is a group CEO who can implement the kind of maintenance that is needed to repair the coal fleet in the shortest time possible so that we can have regular supply of energy like we used to have a couple of years ago. Back in the day when the utility was run by Brian Molefe and Matele Koko, this was done. It was successful. That is an objective fact. And that shows you that the abilities and skills to do this are still there in Eskom. But what we need politicians to stay out of these decisions. We need those who understand how Eskom's inner workings are. They should be given the space to do their work without interference from the likes of the Minister of DPE, Pravin Gordhan, and the board. We just need capable engineers who can ensure that the lights are permanently on.
Well, thank you for that, Phakamile. And just to bring General Bantu Holomisa back into the discussion. Now, being in government, if these allegations, and let's put Andre de Ruyter aside as a personality, but if anyone else would have made these allegations, and I am sure that in many other countries right across the world, there would have been a huge public outcry on these allegations, because these are extremely serious allegations that Andre de Ruyter had actually made. But what we're seeing is within government, and we've even seen with the state capture report, that the ANC has failed to a large extent to hold its members accountable. And we've seen it even with the State Capture Commission, where approximately 200 ANC members were implicated in some form of wrongdoing. And effectively within the ANC, within the party, they are not holding their people responsible, but rather outsourcing it to the likes of the Hawks, to the National Prosecuting Authority, and knowing that they are under-resourced, they are understaffed, and they will not be able to follow through with whatever the members, wrongdoing their members have been alleged or accused of doing. And this is why I'm saying that if this had to happen in any other country, all hell would have actually broken loose, but we are not seeing it in this country.
Well, speaking as a person who has once run a government, I'm referring to the time I was the head of the Transkei government. One thing which we insisted from day one was that political heads of, that is cabinet members, cabinet ministers, they must not usurp the powers of the accounting officers. That means directors general. Their duty is to do an oversight. And we told them the day we hear that a minister has poked his or her nose in the issuing of tenders and businesses, that person should start packing his bags, because we didn't tolerate corruption. And so, coming back home, the ANC has made things worse than the Matanzimas and other homeland leaders then, by making sure that they hijack the powers of the Public Service Commission, who normally appoints the DGs in consultation with the head of government. They simply took the powers of public service and transferred them to Luthuli House. Hence, there is this policy now called a deployment policy, which has caused havoc because they don't position people according to the skills and experience and so on and so on. So I think the way forward, in order to address this, I doubt very much. We're only left with 12 or 13 months before the elections next year. I foresee that the South Africans must put their hope .
Sorry, General Holomisa, I think we have just lost some sound actually, and for some reason or the other, I am led to believe that Adil Nchabelng is back online, and let us try and get hold of him right now. Adil, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Oh, yes, wonderful that you're able to join us, Adil. And we know there have been technical issues that have been playing out, connection problems, but great that you're able to join us. Now, Adil, you and I have had this discussion at the time when Andre de Ruyter was appointed as the CEO of Eskom. And at that point in time, you had serious concerns, you had serious reservations. Now, with his exit and all these allegations that he has actually made, and also at the same time putting himself under pressure right now to provide evidence. We've seen the ANC government firing cannons at Andre de Ruyter, particularly regarding the allegations and the corruption remarks that he had made. And just your take and your thoughts, and also looking at what you and I had actually discussed previously. Are you surprised that Andre de Ruyter has not survived his full term?
Look, I'm totally not surprised at all that there has been a shake-up within Eskom, given the fact that the new board came in with a very clear mandate, and it seems like Mpoma and his team finally did understand what the problem is, in respect with regards to the problem being nothing else but Eskom power plants. So, with this new approach, remember that Andre de Ruyter decided to literally submit a letter of resignation when he met up with Mpoma Kwana, who's the chairperson of Eskom. And Mpo asked him to do a performance, I think it was a review or something. At that incident, it was then that Andre said that he slipped a resignation letter when he was appraised for his performance, which means he was in direct, what would I say, in subordination in a way, because here is a chairperson, who says, look, I want to do a performance appraisal. And then suddenly you decide that on the basis that this guy, he's calling you to literally now read his rights, because he's got the right as a chair to do a performance appraisal. But he then decides, look, I'm going to resign. But there were other many allegations which were not mentioned in the media, that currently when Andre was called for this performance appraisal, there was already an investigation against him for maladministration, as well as going against certain legislation in terms of PFMA, appointing people willy-nilly, literally running a whole record within Eskom. So I'm not shocked that he came out, that he decided to name and literally shame a few people, which, in South Africa, it looks like it's a trend. You just have to whip out the box and say nothing about the names of the people, state a few allegations, and then you get away with it, and you become a hero. And currently, Andre is celebrated, strangely enough, by mainly the white community, having been the savior who tried to save Eskom, but failed due to the level of corruption, which is not a fact. Andre could not do his work. He instead focused on trying to push renewables as a solution towards Eskom, and you completely forgo his responsibility to ensure that the power plants at Eskom are working at optimum level and stage. He didn't focus on the core work. Instead, he went around literally investigating all black people, because in all of his investigation, there is not a single white person mentioned. And yet, you go to Carte Blanche. Every week, they've been reporting on the coal, so-called mafia, that has been literally swapping coals. They would take a coal from a particular mine, take it to a certain site, switch it for rocks, and take it over to the Way Bridge at Eskom. And then they will exchange paperwork there, and then send in rocks instead of sending coal. And these were mainly white people. But it's strange. None of it Andre discovered while he was at Eskom. Yet Carte Blanche had all the evidence, even went to the site and did investigation, and there were allegations, and there were even cases open against people. But all we hear is about black corrupt ministers, fairly so. If ministers are corrupt, they are corrupt. Whether they are black, white, Indian colored, Chinese, we don't care. It has to be laid. But in the case of Andre, it has been a very strange, bizarre, where only black companies, including people like Coco and Brian, had to be arrested over something that didn't make sense. There was not a case. It was based on allegations. NPA had to go on a witch hunt, trying to find a way of actually literally finding, charges against the likes of Brian and Coco. So it's very strange that today we're sitting with a situation where here's a CEO who failed dismally to do his job in order to just give us a basic electricity supply, fix up Eskom's power plants, and ensure that there is a higher level of energy availability factor. Anything between the range of 67 to 72 would have worked for South Africa. Currently, Eskom is sitting with over 21,000 megawatts of unscheduled breakdown, which means plants and units are just breaking, completely unlooked into, where there is no repairs going in, there is no refabrication, there is no maintenance, there is no returning of plants to schedule and working. And at the same time, there is this other push whereby Department of Environmental Affairs has been imposing what we call minimum emission standards onto Eskom's power plants. The reason why there is such a high breakdown is because of the emissions requirements, and nobody wants to tell the truth about it. But, here people are telling us that Andre now is a hero for coming out and laying out allegations against so-called corrupt people within Eskom. But the man couldn't even supply 6,000 megawatts of guaranteed electricity against 21,000 megawatts of broken down plants. And on top of it, they still have about 4,000 megawatts, 3,800 or so of what we do on a regular basis, which is scheduled maintenance. So it doesn't make sense what happened within Eskom. This has been 3 years. Unfortunately, most opposition parties slept on the job. They should have literally, at the beginning of when Andre was employed, took up this matter, knowing his performance was dismal anyway at Nampek. They should have done something. I'm glad that, General Holomisa has now taken this matter to the Constitutional Court and has actually brought the president to the point where he must account to the nation. It was unfortunate. He went in and he gave his own version to say that he is not responsible to the country for providing electricity and load shedding, which was quite bizarre. But I did see that the president did retract part of that affidavit that they actually submitted. So we're in a mess. We need a serious solution. I mean, I'm talking to you right now, being out of electricity from 10 o'clock in the morning. It came back at 8. From 10 o'clock, there was no electricity until 2 o'clock again. All right? From there, in the next 2 hours, it will be off again. Another 4 hours. And then it's a rotational like that. I spent the whole day with none of my technology working. I couldn't even connect to a laptop and other things. So this is the scenario we're living in South Africa. Productivity has been plumbed completely. Nobody's making money except those that are working for government and have guaranteed incomes and salaries. But if you're in business, if you're doing your own hustle, you're in private sector, you're doing other things, it's a struggle. For the ordinary people who are in informal sectors, I can't even imagine what they're going through. Look at the hospital situations and everything. And now we hear that the government wants to go on to this National Disaster Act, whereby they would ensure that under the National Disaster Act, they would expedite procurement of additional power. When Eskom's problem of load shedding has nothing to do with additional power. You can bring in as much power you want into the grid. It's not going to solve anything. The problem sits at the power stations that are currently non-functional. 25,000 capacity is out. And I like what the Commissioner of SARS, Keith Vetter, said about the fact that, he can't understand that how come Eskom does not provide adequate electricity when it's sitting with so much abundant capacity within its plants. And he said that he comes from a background of being a power station manager. So he knows what should have been done at the fundamentals. And he even went further to say that, the likes of Andres, it's strange that he's now being given the celebratory title for so-called busting corruption. But at the same time, he couldn't get to the bolts and nuts and the fundamentals of fixing Eskom. And for me, that is what is problematic right now. That we're now sitting at a situation where we're all losing money. The economy is collapsing. We're like literally in a banana republic. And we still have the ruling party not taking any responsibility. Unfortunately, the minority parties as well as the opposition parties, because of their, I think the fact that they are all mostly disunited, there is no movement to can bring about change that people want. There's a lot of apathy today. If you ask people, people like myself, I still support in the NC, but I feel very disappointed because even the party that we gave life to didn't listen to us, does not take our views and inputs, and yet we're experts in the industry. If they would ask me to be the Minister of Electricity, this problem within 12 months will be sorted out. They know the problems where they sit. They know the solution, but they don't want capable people to come in and take over and make sure they bring back the capacity that is currently idling and not working, that is currently being shut down, and bring it back into operation. Out of 21,000 megawatts, if you just recover 6,000, load shedding has ended. You recover a further 4,000 megawatts, which is about 10,000 megawatts in combination, right? You have a reserve of electricity availability, right? To the point where you can now kickstart industrialization. You can kickstart the movement of the economy. But you don't hear that among politicians. People like us, we speak these things for how many years? Instead, media just actually silences us as well as they blacklist us on the list of people that should not be invited to give input and opinion. And we're not against any source. Whether they want to talk about renewable, they want to talk about baseload. Electricity is electricity. It's got fundamentals. It's engineering. It's got, its capacity. It's got its availability. It's got the fundamentals of it, which is baseload based on high voltage, renewables based on low voltage. And both of them cannot work synchronously in a system like what we have in South Africa, because it's two different technologies. And nobody understands those fundamentals or refuses to understand it. Instead, they want to buy more renewables and try to put it into a high voltage network and electricity grid, which will not work. So, I don't know, this problem. I'm glad we have really, General Holomisa, we've got NUMSA, Phakamile. These are people who have been fighting, and they're still fighting. But we're all lone voice. Our sort of impact is very minimal at a realistic level. So I'm just saying that I think we need to up the tempo and increase the volume of this level of frustration. And something must be done. We cannot allow this.
Well, Adil, definitely. Exactly, something will have to be done, and I believe that General Bantu Holomisa is back with us as well, and we just lost him there for a few seconds. But just to bring the General back into the discussion, and I just want to focus on this case that is being brought by the UDM and 18 others, talking about the government being in breach of the Constitution. And Adil alluded to the fact that initially, the President, Cyril Ramaphosa, said that the government is not constitutionally obligated to provide South Africa with power, and he later on retracted the statement. But for the President to make a statement like that initially in response to this action that yourself as a UDM and 18 others have brought, just your thoughts, and what are you hoping to obviously achieve through this action and this matter that you are placing in front of the Constitutional Court?
Firstly, we hope that the Constitution will agree with us that this government is negligent. And secondly, we hope that the the High Court rather will agree with us that the state resources which have been poured to Eskom has been partly misused by the ruling party itself. And thirdly, we hope that the High Court will instruct at least on humanitarian grounds that at least the hospitals and the police stations, they must not be affected by this load shedding, because the load shedding is a man-made load shedding as we see it. You can't be told that on Friday the load shedding will be at a certain stage, and then when that stage comes, and then they say to you, no, it's because the coal is wet, the coal quality of the coal is not good, it's sabotage. Yet they have warned us a week before. So there is a confusion there. As far as the president is concerned, I think he was taking chances, thinking that he would run away technically, but we immediately exposed him that he is reneging from being accountable for this mess. Bear in mind that it is him who was once a chair at the operations room at Eskom when he was the deputy president. He knew about this problem, and he has also been telling us, or even cancel his trips abroad and say he's coming back to fix the Eskom. I had to watch the space. Within such and such a month, the whole thing will be sorted out. But he doesn't want us he doesn't tell us that the ruling party is also a beneficiary out. Both in Kusile and Medupi, they were given money by the state to build that plant, but part of that money, as we know now, went to the ruling party. So a person who knows that, because he has been a member of the NEC for many years. I don't think we have a government here in one word. These guys have failed. It's only now that we are seeing the results. We have been telling the people of South Africa. I'm the one who was proposing 2 years ago, 2021, that we need an interim government because the findings, the reports which were emanating from Zondo Commission were serious. That's why I was saying for ANC to say they are doing a renewal of what? Can we expect them to self-correct themselves? No, not for the state. I'm sorry. They have failed. They must go.
Thank you for that, General. And we're going to bring Phakamile back into the discussion. And obviously, from what the General is saying, that the ANC is shirking responsibility. But just looking at, Adil mentioning that we've got all these protests and all these concerns that are being raised by pockets of people. And what is required is a more, a coordinated effort that is going to make maximum impact. Sadly, the lawyers have been making a lot of money because we've seen on a number of occasions, whether it's to do with what the General is saying at this point in time, the matter going to the High Court, even during the time of the COVID pandemic, where many cases went to the courts. And it does appear that the lawyers, the advocates, are raking it in with millions that is being spent on court cases every time the government shirks in its responsibility.
Well, I think certainly on the issue of, if you're speaking generally about lawyers, yes, I agree. I think we've been very fortunate in this case where, because by the way, NUMSA is part of this application. So it's UDM, NUMSA, Health and Allied Indaba Workers Trade Union, Action SA, and a couple of others. I can't remember the names. But the bottom line here is that in this case, these lawyers, Advocate Tembeka Ncukai Toby, and as well as Eric Mabuza, are actually doing the work pro bono. And the action came from them sort of, reaching out to us and saying, comrades, there's a case that we need to take to court on this issue because we can see that this is a massive issue affecting society at large. And I think what you're seeing here, where you see all of these organizations coming together, most of us ideologically are not necessarily on the same page. But the one thing that's uniting us is this issue of load shedding. Because the fact is that there's no one in this country who's not affected by load shedding, except if you're a cabinet minister, then perhaps you're exempt. But for the rest of us, we are all dealing with this crisis. So you're right when you say that there needs to be more, pardon me, mass mobilization. But I think it's happening. The groundswell is picking up. And I do believe that as we get closer and closer to the court date, you will see all of these forces sort of coagulating and coming together. As we speak, EFF has called for a massive stay away on the 20th of March. UDM and NUMSA are mobilizing their members to picket and march on the day of the court case. I'm pretty sure you will see other organizations doing the same, because this really is an issue that speaks to our collective survival. We cannot trust this government. The only way we're going to get real answers from them in order to stop load shedding is to hold them before a full bench of judges, where they have to produce evidence for the lies that they've been telling us for the last 6 months or so. And this is actually at the heart of this court case. We know full well that there is a way for them to do the right thing. They have refused to do that. And the only way we can force them to do that is to take them to court. And so we're hoping that the court will assist us to compel this government to act in our interests. For example, they're closing down power stations, coal-fired power stations prematurely. And they're doing that because of agreements that they've signed as part of COP, where they said they would reduce our dependence on coal and so that we could, transition into depending on renewable energy. But for you to do that, you need to have a proper plan. You need to, for example, have a social plan for Mpumalanga, where 12 out of 15 of the coal stations exist. And if you shut down those power stations, it means over 100,000 families will immediately be plunged into abject poverty. You need to, for example, make sure that as you shut down power stations, you have an alternative, reliable form of energy, because South Africa's energy base is coal. And unfortunately, this government has been misled by the private sector in the renewable energy industry, who are benefiting hugely through these these contracts that they have. But they're not assisting us at all with actually dealing with load shedding. And this is why we've had to take them to court, because if we didn't do so, then the situation would only worsen.
Well, thank you for that, Phakamile. And just to bring Adil back into the discussion, Adil, the impression that the government has been giving, and we've seen this even during the time of the State of the Nation address, that it is giving priority to Eskom, it is giving priority to fixing Eskom and to provide electricity. And to the point that the Minister of Electricity was also appointed. But this is all empty rhetoric. I think generally the masses in the country have actually become used to this empty rhetoric that is being repeated over and over again. We've seen this during the budget speech as well, where Eskom was given priority. We've seen about rebates and incentives and solar power and all these things that are playing out. But again, all we are seeing is just talk and absolutely no action on the part of the government. I think Adil we've lost him again. Yes,
apologies.
okay, there we go, Adil.
Yeah. Look, at whatever we try to resolve the problems of Eskom, none of the technologies that we are all aspiring towards, running towards, which is all green, environmental, sustainable technologies, are of any use to run at a national scale. You can't run Eskom right now on a renewable solution. None of the technology is ready, unless we're talking about nuclear as a baseload solution. The Afrikaners, when they built the current power network and grid in power generation, they used coal for a particular reason. Why? It was cheap, it was available, it could guarantee them sovereign control as well as sovereignty, and they didn't have to depend on imports for their power supply. The reason why they build a high voltage and synchronized power plants, which means all these power plants produce a 50 hertz cycles per second of what you call a hertz in terms of technology, and they are all synchronized, is because you need that level of power in order to produce the megawatts required. And you need stable power plants that are running at a synchronized level. Any drop of that particular head causes what we call a systems event, right? An operator's event, where in the process of any drop in terms of voltage or megawatts in the system, it causes a current challenge where you can have a network as well as a grid collapse. They built this system for a reason. Right now, we're talking about introducing renewables. Brilliant idea, but technology is not yet developed to can power a nation. It can power a house. It can power, for instance, the cars that are being used today with electric battery cars. You can use it for mini industrial, like your light commercial environment, factories for lighting, for computers and everything. But the minute you go into heavy industrial demand and requirement, you can't do that because it's a combination of technologies that uses mainly battery and inverter technology. From the solar side of it, it comes on DC, which is direct current. Our network does not work on direct current. It only transmits, meaning they run direct current on the basis whereby they produce it from the power plants and run it through a DC line, which is power with the pylons that you see them running in kilometers around the country. Then they come to a substation. The substation breaks down that electricity and breaks it down to become actually from a DC to the other electricity, which is CD, right? Where it breaks it down from a alternative current, AC. From there, they are then able to can make sure that it's pushed via certain transformers into the household, industries, and everything, depending on the requirement of the power. So what people tend to misunderstand is that there is no technology. Even if you talk about wind, you need to then build power stations, the transformer grids, that will be able to receive that electricity when available. And when not available, you need to have a standby generator, like you would have in a case of Eskom, in order to do what we call a standby, to provide you with as and when it's not available, plus on top of it to provide you with peaking hour, where we have picker plants. So whatever dreams we have, renewables are not ready to power high voltage infrastructure like South Africa. You can do pilot projects that currently we're doing in terms of IPPs and PPAs that have been signed. All of these IPPs are currently on the pilot project. Eskom is unable to use that power right now because it gets curtailed, which means as it's produced, because it's a frequency fluctuation, it goes up and down, and it causes spikes in the network. They cannot allow it to come into the network. So that's the problem we have. That's why when Eskom talks about the available megawatts in the system, they only refer to base load power. Any other power currently is augmental, supplemental, and you and I can buy it for our own use, for interim use when there is no electricity from Eskom. So there are dynamics and fundamentals which are pure engineering. It's not emotions, it's got nothing to do with what I think or I don't think, whether I like renewables or I don't like. It's not even my opinion. It's fundamental science. Right now we need nuclear in South Africa. We need coal. If we can get gas somewhere cheaper in South Africa or surrounding our shore line, which is in the ocean, we can find our gas that we can control. Wonderful, we can bring in gas. Because if you're going to be importing gas, your gas prices have already tripled or quadrupled in the last 6 months due to the Ukraine-Russian conflict. So you cannot peg a technology on such high levels of fluctuation based on global markets. So the Afrikaners did it deliberately to say use the coal, and they were using the last quality coal, which is the lowest quality coal of the lowest calories. They used it for the power plants that are currently being used. They took the high value coal and they exported it. Part of it they used it for cooking coal. Part of it they used for creation of steel industry in South Africa. Part of it they used to create cement. So there were certain multiple applications used. But we just completely forgotten all of that history and completely raised it and tried to come up with something that is not going to work. Show me one country in the world that is currently pioneering its industrialization, not even Germany, on renewable energy. I have nothing wrong with renewable energy. I use part of it in my own environment, but I know its limitations. It cannot run anything at an industrial scale. It cannot power a nation at what we have. We've got 399,000 kilometers of power line cables in South Africa. Bring in any renewable system in it, you'll see it will crash instantly. Nothing will work in the country. So that's the fundamentals we're sitting with. So why must Eskom consume over 30% of its budget, paying for something that does not produce the electricity and the guarantee of power that we need in the country? What should have been done is they should have broken out IPPs and created a department of IPPs and created a separate legislation and created a treasury instrument in order to guarantee whoever wants to invest in that space that they will have sovereignty protection. And then they can negotiate among themselves what they are going to do with regards to power purchase agreement. Leave Eskom being a legacy electricity provider and the provider of last resort, and grow it alongside the competition that comes from other suppliers with new energy generation, whether it's renewable, whether it's to do with hydro, whether it's to do with biomass, whether it's to do with battery storage, or you're talking about wind or solar. You run it at a parallel level, but you remove it out of Eskom's income and balance sheet, as well as Eskom's revenues. That's where the problem is, and that is why Eskom cannot focus on doing its fundamental work, which is to produce electricity that is cheap. But now the president has gone ahead in his sauna, he announced that they have created a company, which means unbundling has already almost been finished. They have created a company in Eskom called the National Transmission Company, which was going to be the core focus of Eskom. Eskom is no longer going to be a generation company. They're going to focus on transmission as well as distribution with municipalities. So you see how devious some of our lawmakers and executives particularly are in the way that they are taking South Africa in its trajectory of growth and development. And they are not even taking us into confidence. We're just being announced decisions that have already been taken. But nothing was ever opened up to the public for proper and thorough interrogation.
Well, Adil, I must say, it's always a pleasure talking to you because, you provide us with this masterclass on electricity, and there's just so much that you actually bring to the fore. And I'm sure I see General Bantu Holomisa is actually nodding as I am speaking right now, and I'm sure he agrees with you. And also, I think we are getting towards the end of the discussion. But General Bantu, just in closing, the point that Adil had made as well, that looking at it from a political perspective, political parties working in isolation. We've got a huge problem. We've got a massive problem. And one would expect to see, especially within the opposition benches, everybody coming together for a common purpose, a common goal, and also working with people like the unions, with people like Phakamile, working with people like Adil, who has got so much knowledge, so much experience. There is just so much value that he brings to the discussion, to the point that I would vote him as the Minister of Electricity. But, just working together with the public so that, you can make maximum impact and put all this pressure on the ANC government that is not taking accountability in any way whatsoever. If you could unmute your mic, please. Here we go. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Firstly, I fully agree with the last speaker. The truth of the matter is that you cannot migrate from fossil fuels to renewables without putting infrastructure. That infrastructure will be the one called transmission. Therefore, there would be no transition in this country without transmission. That transmission, therefore, needs to look at, if we are moving away from where we are and we are saying we are going to have a green grid, which is friendly to renewables. Does the current infrastructure ready to absorb that that transition? You will find that we are getting into a deep debt because it's going to need trillions of rands to put that infrastructure into place. So it's a very catch-22 situation which we need to raise loudly in Parliament. Secondly, the issue of energy mix is still the best. I fully agree. You will recall that in 1994, 1993, when ANC took power from the Afrikaners, the Americans and other countries, developed countries, said, no, South Africa must disarm its nuclear head. But under the apartheid, they helped to develop that nuclear. And because now it was going to be in the hands of the blacks, we were told, no, sign the treaty agreement, but still, they were lenient to say we can use it for commercial purposes. Right. What happened then after that, we didn't invest much on that. I still remember, I think this process of wanting to develop nuclear, use nuclear for commercial purposes, was started by former President Mbeki He talked to the Russians, he talked to the French people. I'm sure if one were to ask him, why did this thing didn't take off? Solosy, because he had an institutional memory, tried to push this case, but they said, no, 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 no. Don't do that. You must move away from fossil fuels towards renewable. Don't use the nuclear as part of that. But if you go to USA, you go to Britain, you go to China, go to Russia, all this, even in Israel, they use this energy mix. In particular, the nuclear is the one which is guaranteed that whatever happens to them, nuclear will always back them. So we need to open up to each other. As far as the coordination of cooperation amongst the opposition, I think we have done well as opposition parties. You wouldn't be talking about Zondo commissions today if the opposition parties were not working together. You will recall that we were the ones who took a decision to go to the Concord when Thulima Donsela's findings, ANC wanted to dump them in the dustbin. But fortunately now we have the Zondo Commission's findings. At least let's use that as a guide for future government. Don't expect the current government to fix this country using that as a guide. So I'm happy today and next week, around 15 or 16, the leaders of the opposition again will be meeting to evaluate the state of the nation. We will be talking about the load shedding. We will also be talking about what to do, what should we be expecting, and what will we be ready if the voters next year are saying never again in this country shall they put all their eggs in one basket. Meaning, therefore, the coalitions are here to stay. But what we need to agree and do, maybe we need a guideline which would say this is how the coalition will work at national and future in local government, like we did in 1994 during the government of national unity. It was regulated. We need to make sure that these coalitions are regulated so that you avoid another corruption where people are bought to cross the floor. UDM campaigned against that legislation and it's no longer in our statute books. We can't go back there.
Well, thank you very much for that. And I know we are overrunning a bit on time. Phakamile, final thoughts from you?
Well, first of all, I really appreciate the inputs from both the general and also from Prince Adil Nchabelng. I think they've given a lot of insight, certainly on what needs to be done. And if I can just sort of, piggyback on what Prince Nchabeleng has said with regards to baseload, I really think that it is time for the South African government to put its developmental needs first. If the justification for the premature closure of power stations is because of the just transition, then we must follow the just transition guidelines as they are outlined in the ILO. And the ILO is very clear that as you transition from a dependence on fossil fuels to renewable energy, that transition must not leave the next generation worse off. It must not, for example, increase unemployment, poverty, or inequality. And I'm just going to be frank and say that this government is stupid. I'm sorry to say, but they are stupid for the decisions that they've taken to prematurely close down these power stations when we need energy right now. They've already begun the process of shutting down coal-powered fire stations. We've already lost more than 2,200 megawatts, and there's plans to shut down more. And if we are not going to be realistic about how this is affecting our economy, then this renewable energy program and this so-called just transition is fake. It's not real. What we're doing is implementing some kind of green colonialism, if we can call it that. Because at the end of the day, the Western Europe is putting its people first. Germany, as I speak to you now, has over 120,000 megawatts installed capacity of renewable energy, and yet they have increased their usage of coal. They have reopened mothballed power stations because they do not want their people to be sitting in the dark because of load shedding. Why can't we do the same? And it really boggles the mind as to what is in the heads of these cabinet ministers when they make these decisions. It's very obvious that our sovereignty as a country has been sacrificed. And it's really time for South Africans to start asking hard questions. Can you really continue to justify voting ANC when it is this ANC that's causing you to sit in the dark? When it is this decisions by this ANC that's causing perpetual rolling blackouts that are killing patients in hospitals, killing jobs in the industrial sector, and killing our economy. It's about time that South Africans started taking their voting seriously and start forcing. If they can't force this government to act in their interest, then they need to start making different choices. Because otherwise, we are going to continue to suffer if we keep making the same choices to vote in the same people who keep acting against our interests.
Well, thank you for that, Phakamile. And just the final thought from Adil before we end the show. Well, I think we've lost Adil. Just final thoughts from you as well, General Bantu Holomisa, before we end off.
Hlubi has, okay, there he comes. I was saying Hlubi has covered me. I cannot spoil that closing remarks from her. I fully concur.
Well, thank you very much for that. And also to you, Phakamile Hlubi Majola, and also to you, General Bantu Holomisa and Adil Nchabelng. We thank you. We do appreciate all three of you taking time out, being part of this discussion right here on Salam Media. We wish you all the best, and please take care. We certainly will follow developments and as you head towards this court case as well.
Thank you.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of Wednesday Nights with myself, United Wadi, right here on Salam Media. And I believe that a lot of ground has been covered, a lot has been unpacked, and yes, this is the mood of the country in more ways than one. And we've had the spokesperson from the trade union there. We've had a member of parliament, the leader of one of the political parties, and also Crown Prince Adil Nchabelng. So much knowledge, the wealth, the depth of his knowledge as far as the electricity problem in the country is concerned. There is just so much that he brings to the discussion, and we value that. And we will definitely follow up on some of these issues that have been playing out. And but for now, I'm going to be leaving you. It's been wonderful being in your company once again, our listeners, our viewers on the various platforms of Salam Media. From myself and the team, Assalamu alaikum.